Looking around the chapel of the Divine Mercy, we have many images of saints. You see in the high altar we have St. Augustine, off to the right, or your right, my left, St. Paul, the images of St. Joseph and Our Lady. And then as we go around the chapel, we have San Jose Sanchez, the young Mexican martyr who was 14 when he died, St. Pio, St. Therese, St. John Paul II, St. Anthony, St. Dominic, St. Faustina, ending over here with St. John the Baptist. So we have these images of these saints. And as I was praying about this homily this week, I was thinking, well, 3 of those 12 were martyrs. I consider John the Baptist a martyr because he died standing up for the dignity of marriage. And so I think he died for that teaching. And so I consider him a martyr. St. Jose and St. Paul were all martyrs as well with him. The other 9 were, let's call them martyrs of the daily grind, because they lived a variety of years. St. Therese was 24 when she died. St. John Paul II was 85 when he died. And so you have, and the rest of those saints all fall in that age range. But they were faithful until the day the Lord called them home. And looking at the martyrs, I think that their lives are so very inspiring. John the Baptist went down in a fiery homily that got him in trouble with Herod's wife, and he got his head chopped off. And St. Paul wasn't much far behind St. John the Baptist. He too had his head chopped off. And if you know the story about little St. Jose, as they were beating him at his death, he said these words, "You have done a lot to me, but God still allows me to continue. But when I can speak no longer, if I can wiggle my toes, that means Viva Cristo Rey and Viva the Virgin of Guadalupe." And he died with those words on his lips, that desire to be a witness to Christ. And when these 3 martyrs, and all the martyrs, when they are dying, they're in love with Christ and they're keeping their eyes on Christ, asking for his help to help them through this little storm. And I want to make that connection to today's gospel, the storms of life and that which leads up to martyrdom. Those crosses that we carry are storms. Well, the martyrs keep their eyes on Christ in the midst of the storm, trying to hang on, trying to be faithful to the end. And this is an act of faith. And I don't think that these saints, as they are trying to keep their eyes on Jesus, they're not wondering, oh, I wonder what my holy card will look like when I die. They're not thinking about that. They're keeping focused on Christ. And so, thinking along those numbers of 25% to 75%, that means that I guess if we were to break it down in this congregation, all the people in the chapel today, 25% of the people would be maybe from the confessional doors in the back to the very back of the church. That would be 25%. And the rest of us would be the 75%, including my brother priests and the seminarians and brothers here in the sanctuary. So 25 and 75. 25%, and we know that you're the good Catholics because all the best Catholics sit in the back of church. You know that. So you're all martyrs, okay? You're all the martyrs back there. You're going to die for the faith. And the rest of us have to live the martyrdom of the daily grind. We're going to live anywhere from 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years. And we have to be faithful every day. So what's it going to take to live the martyrdom of the daily grind well? And of course, we've got to keep our eyes on Christ. And we are given the opportunities. We know, each one of us knows our particular situation, what it means to live out the martyrdom of the daily grind in our particular life. And we've got to keep our eyes on Jesus. We rely on Christ to be able to do this. And God has given us the church. He's given us her teachings. He's given us the commandments to aid us in living out this daily martyrdom. And you know, the teachings of the church aren't hard to know, but they are challenging to live sometimes. The commandments are pretty clear. But we know that in living out these teachings and living out this relationship with Jesus, we have to rise above ourselves, and we have to rise above our own opinions. And so often our opinions are so formed by the culture and all of the media that we take in. There's a lot of noise. And we have to quiet that down, like Elijah in the first reading today had to go out to the mountain to go into the cave. And he knew that God wasn't in the wind and he wasn't in the earthquake. God was in the still small voice. And we do need to quiet down. And so our opinions so often about how we live life and our morality is so often formed by the culture that if we don't have that silence and that quiet and keeping our eyes on Christ and spending that time with the Lord, then we are going to personally have opinions, and we're going to say something like this. Well, I know what the church teaches, but I disagree with that. I have my own opinion about that. And it's true, the Lord is merciful. The Lord will bring us along. But do I choose my own opinion over that which Christ has revealed to us? And then, again, when you look at these saints like St. Pio, or Our Lady and St. Joseph, or Blessed Carlo Acutis, or any of the saints of our modern era, did they put their personal opinions over that of the church? And what the church wants to lead us to is freedom. Freedom in a relationship with Christ. Freedom to a life of grace. Father, come on. You sound like a travel agent for a guilt trip. Lighten up, Father. Come on. What's wrong with having my opinion? Well, we can have our opinion, but that, as Father David likes to say, the theme song of hell is, I did it my way. And that's not what God created us for. He did not create us for that. He created us to be happy with him in heaven. He wants us to be happy with him in heaven. And again, whether or not we're ever canonized a saint, that's beside the point. A saint is a sinner who never stops trying. And that's what God wants for us. He wants us to be open to that life of grace, even with our falls. And, that's the beauty of St. Peter. In the gospel today and in Peter's life at the time of the scourging in the courtyard, Peter betrayed Jesus. Peter took his eyes off of Christ. Peter sank in the water today when he looked at the storm all around him and he became more worried about the storm. He did take his eyes off Christ, but he did keep trying. It's the difference between Peter and Judas. Judas looked for worldly answers. Judas stayed tuned into his iPhone. And Peter realized there needed to be some quiet. Peter hung on where Judas did not. And so this is why I want to make this point about my personal opinions, especially when it happens to disagree with church teaching. Well, I disagree with the church on that. Well, let me ask you this. Is your opinion, is it self-serving? What do you benefit from your opinion in disagreeing with church teaching? What do you get out of it? I want to propose to you something with regards to a matter of dignity of human life regarding euthanasia. And I'm going to pick for a moment, I'm going to pick on the baby boomers who are in the congregation. And not everyone has this opinion, I know that. But what I'm about to share with you, I have heard from more baby boomers than anyone else. And I've heard this line a number of times. When I come to the end of my days, I just don't want to be a burden to anyone. And so as the conversation goes, will they justify in their own mind euthanasia of some sort, choosing to, take a pill, do something that's going to bring their life to an end? I just don't want to be a burden to my children. Never mind the fact that your kids love you. And yes, you might have had your differences over the years, but yet they still love you. Why would you rob them of the opportunity to show their love to you at the end of your days? To give charity to you as you have given charity to them. I don't think people realize how prideful that statement can sound. And on a certain level, I understand that it's a jar to our pride. We don't want to be a burden to others. Okay, but at some point, we don't have a choice in the matter, do we? The Lord's going to call us home at some point, and it's on the Lord's timetable. It's not ours. And so we do need to be open to the possibility of receiving charity from those around us. And I know I struggle to receive charity from my confreres. But when we do that, when we're not willing to receive charity from those around us, we are taking our eyes off of Christ. And we need to get our eyes back on Jesus, because it's very likely that Jesus is going to work through others to help us, to show us his love. That's one of the ways, the Lord works through those around us. And especially with these end-of-life issues, we're not talking about Old Yeller. We're not talking about a goldfish you're going to flush down the toilet, okay? We're talking about a living, breathing human person. A soul that when they leave this world, they're going to live either in hell, heaven, maybe with a stop in purgatory on the way. But how that person lived out their last days, living out the martyrdom of the daily grind, that is going to help determine their time in purgatory and, God willing, their trip to heaven. But that daily grind purifies us. And that daily grind requires we keep our eyes on Jesus. And the daily grind is going to require that maybe we receive the charity from those around us, love from those around us. And I understand how complicated that end-of-life issues can be. And I'm not going to give a whole conference on that, the many things that go along with the end-of-life issues. But, we're all going to die. And we certainly never do anything intentional to take a human life. We give nutrition and hydration at the end of life for as long as the body can receive it. And then even at some point, the body rejects even nutrition and hydration. And the Lord calls us home. And it's up to each one of you to educate yourself, especially about these end-of-life issues. I know on the Lighthouse Catholic Media rack in the narthex, in the back there was at least recently a pamphlet on end-of-life issues. You need to educate yourself about those things. And if something doesn't make sense, then you need to ask a question of a priest or someone you trust who understands the church teaching on that. Because especially in this particular topic, this is where people can give charity and also receive charity. And the Lord is going to work through those who are going to show that love. I don't know if you know what's going on in Canada right now, but in 2016, the Canadian government passed a law that allows medically assisted suicide. And it was supposed to be utilized only when a person's death was foreseeable. I don't know what that means. That's the word of the law. We're all going to die one day, It doesn't make any sense. But as time has gone along, and they've utilized this law, and people have ended their lives, now people who have mental health issues, who aren't within the last days or weeks of life, but those who are in their 20s and 30s, who have poor mental health, they are applying to kill themselves for this medically assisted suicide, and it's being granted. Now, in some cases, families who know that the loved one struggles with mental health issues, they're trying to block this person's decision to end their life because they know they're just at a very low spot. And they're trying to love them, but the government won't let them in to do that, and so these lives are ended. It's not every case, I realize, but it's going on in Canada. And, we've allowed it here in the United States on a state level. How long before it becomes a federal law? And who becomes the one who decides this person needs to be euthanized and this one doesn't? It is a vicious slope. And with this, we need to be cautious how much our morality, our thoughts on these matters are being formed by the culture. And we've got to keep our eyes on Christ. We've got to keep our eyes on what the church teaches and the beauty in charity that we give to those around us. And so, as Jesus called Peter to himself today, he said when Peter was in the boat, Jesus said, "Come." Jesus didn't give a whole bunch of detailed advice on the finer points of walking on water. He said, "Come, have faith, follow me." And so with these end-of-life issues, what do you do for a person? You love them. And what's that going to look like in each particular case? You take it on a case-by-case basis, but love first. We don't intentionally take a person's life. Because if you only see dollar signs and the cost of what it's going to take to care for this person, then you don't see Christ in that person. You don't see Christ in them. And all you see is dollar signs. Oh, and this is it's going to cost us X amount of dollars. And if you're not looking for Christ in those around you, then my guess is you don't have a good idea of what it is to have Christ in yourself either. And that's a spooky place to be if we have so decreased the value of the human person to that extent. And so for us to be looking for Christ in others as well, and to receive, again, that charity and that love, and to show that charity and that love. And, looking at a person, seeing Christ in them, this isn't just the sick or those near death, but it's everyone we come in contact with. And we do want to see Christ in those around us. I want to close with a story, one that is about a man who understood very well the martyrdom of the daily grind. And I read this story in this month's issue of the Magnificat. And so maybe some of you saw this, but it's about a Father William Atkinson, who is a priest of the Augustinian order, and he was ordained in 1974. But he was the first quadriplegic ever to be ordained as a Catholic priest. So that meant he was confined to a wheelchair and had very limited use of his hands. He grew up Catholic. As a boy growing up, he loved sports. He was a pretty good athlete. He had a brother who played for the New York Jets. So would have been, a competitive family too, from the story as it relayed that. But in the 1960s, the mid-1960s, young Bill joined the Augustinians, and he was studying for the priesthood in New Hamburg, New York. And during recreation one day, he and some seminarians were in the snow. They were taking a toboggan down the hill, and the toboggan veered off the path. He hits a tree, and his neck is broken. And so he's left as a quadriplegic. Now, they thought he was going to die, so they anointed him, they gave him his viaticum, and he began to recover. And then he actually recovered. His health began to return, but obviously not the use of his arms and legs. And so he began praying about what the next step would be. And as Bill says it, he went back to the seminary as an act of obedience and faith in God. He didn't know what God had in store, but he knew that God wanted him to take this step, because that was the path that God had opened up for him. So he used a motorized wheelchair around the seminary. He wrote his papers. His caregivers would put a pencil in his mouth, and he would peck, letter by letter, as he typed up the pages for his papers. He had to peck each one, so it's the old hunt and peck method, but he didn't have two fingers going, he only had the pencil just going away at it. What kind of grit and determination and perseverance would that take? I would not have held on, not as a seminarian. But Bill thanked God every day for the caregivers, the round-the-clock care that was given him, and he professed solemn vows on July the 20th of 1973, not knowing if he would ever be ordained as a priest. But just before solemn vows, he sent a letter to Pope Paul VI and asked for the dispensation, because he could be dispensed by the Holy Father to be ordained a priest. So he said this in his letter: And it really is. It's a beautiful reflection and really highlights the dignity of the human person. He said, "From my physical condition, the Lord is obviously calling me to a very special vocation, closely conformed to his own cross. It is my conviction that in this modern age, where the dignity of human life is measured by productivity alone, where suffering should be eliminated at all costs, we must more than ever preach Christ crucified. I believe that my own witness to the world of the mysterious love of God working in my weakness can be of tremendous assistance to those people who lack faith, who lack hope of a better tomorrow. Let it not be my will, but his will that is done," meaning God's will, God's will be done. And so Bill kept his eyes on Christ. 2 weeks later, a reply came from the Vatican, a very short message. "The Atkinson dispensation granted." And so he was ordained a priest in February, about 7 months later, in 1974. He went on to be a school teacher, where he taught at Monsignor Bonner High School in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania, for almost 30 years. And he was an active priest in his order, offered Mass, preached, heard confessions, performed weddings, funerals. But he was a man who kept his eyes on Christ, who was dependent on that love of Christ and the love of those around him. And he entered into the martyrdom of the daily grind in a very serious, generous way. Each day he knew it was going to be a challenge, but each day he woke up knowing that he would have to rely on the Lord. And so for us, that we too not look at all the storms, but that we keep our eyes on Jesus. Because God wants you to be a saint, and a saint is a sinner who never stops trying. And so if you live faithfully that martyrdom of the daily grind, we might not read about you in the Magnificat, but you will be a sinner who is well on their way to heaven. Praised be Jesus Christ, now and forever.